Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by writer, broadcaster and campaigner Darren McGarvey. Hello Darren.
Hello there, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. So much to talk to you about, so I'm going to give you the big introduction if that's okay, because it feeds into what we're going to discuss. Your first book, Poverty Safari, was awarded the Orwell Prize for political writing, and your latest book, Trauma Industrial Complex, is out now. But you're also known as the rap artist Loki, whose album Not Funded by Creative Scotland, which is a brilliant title, we'll come to that later as well, came out this year, and you're nominated for the Best Hip Hop Artist for this year's Scottish Alternative Music Awards. Lots to talk about.
Yeah.
But you just had a sold out show at Ivory Blacks in Glasgow. Now, was that your Fringe show? Was that taking that on? How was it?
It went really well. It was the Fringe show, although it was being brought out of storage after a few months away after the Fringe. So when we got there, then we were suddenly beset by technical problems, partly as a result of us just thinking, well, this is in the bag.
Right.
But literally the thing that was in the bag was the loop pedal that I run a lot of my audio and voiceover off for the show, and when I went to turn it on, it just wouldn't go on. So it was quite tense beforehand. But luckily with Becky there, Mark McGee and a bunch of other kind of seasoned musicians, we managed to get through it. But yeah, we only announced that gig 3 weeks ago as well, so to sell out the venue in that time was a good indication of the kind of appetite there is for discussion around the themes of the book and trauma generally.
And you're going to be taking it on tour, I think.
Yes, that's happening 2026, UK and hopefully Ireland. The show I will adapt slightly for the tour, but basically the 2023 tour that I did around my second book, Social Distance Between Us, it surprised me the level of demand across the UK, not just for the book but for me. I was playing in places I had never heard of, in 300, 400 capacity venues that were sold out, and I suddenly realised, hang on, I've got another prong to what I can do here. And the good thing was, because I was a kind of unknown quantity as a touring artist, I struggled to find any kind of backing or sponsorship or anyone who wanted to oversee the management and take a lot of the risk out of it for me. So I just did it myself. But obviously when you take all the risk, you get all the reward.
Sure. And
it ended up being quite lucrative in terms of it's not too labour intensive. It's just me, one person show, just travelling around on trains, not a lot of overheads or anything. So actually I was like, wow, if I have a year where I don't have any kind of a TV job coming in and I can't bank on that sort of stuff, I have this other thing that I can do as an artist now, which is just go out and play around the country. Yeah.
And so that was why you put it on at the Fringe?
Absolutely. The Fringe is usually a good place to either do a companion live show for the book that's currently out, or if I'm in between books, I'll maybe road test an idea for a book at the Fringe, just to sort of gauge what is the audience response to certain points that I might make or certain topics that I want to cover with a social distance between us. While I did adapt that into a live show, there was an earlier kind of prototype version of that I trial ran at the Fringe in 2019, just to get a gauge, because I knew my audience is getting more middle class and more affluent, but I wanted to write something that was challenging, because I think Poverty Safari maybe affirmed a lot of people in ways that maybe some of my comrades on the left were not fans of. The stuff about personal responsibility and stuff, that does have a kind of cross-political appeal. So I remember going to the Fringe and thinking, right, I want to write something just to let people know where I stand on certain things. So I used the Fringe as a way, really, if you want to test your ideas against a middle-class audience, Edinburgh Fringe is a place to do it.
And what was the response, did you think?
I thought that I started to realise that I'm a kind of, I guess, that feeling that people describe when they go and see someone like Jerry Sadowitz, right? They describe a feeling where they're engaging with something which on some level is wrong or deeply challenging, and they don't know if they should enjoy it or like it or be interested in it. But when they come out after it, they feel kind of lighter and they feel kind of cleansed in a way. So I would say my political stuff and shows are a bit like that, but in a sociological sense. Do you know what I mean? Dealing with topics related to class and culture, not necessarily primarily through comedy, although there are elements of comedy.
Yeah.
But I think people do come out feeling a bit less burdened because of the stuff that I bring to them during the performance.
I went to one of your shows near the end of the Fringe, and it was interesting because you got the feeling that there was an audience that they didn't quite know how to react. You know, should I laugh at that? And that is challenging in itself.
It is, and
Must be challenging for you too.
it is challenging, and sometimes you go in and you're feeling quite playful, and that energy is fun to work with. But then other days you go in and you might be aware there's a reviewer in, or you might be aware that there's a journalist lurking somewhere, and on those days you really wanted to go according to your expectations. So if the audience is showing what sometimes can register when you're anxious as a sort of indifference, usually they're just captive, or usually they're waiting for a signal of how to respond. Sometimes that can agitate me, which brings another thing into the performance. But certainly I have enjoyed over these last 5 or 6 years getting to run my shows in comedy clubs.
Yeah.
Because humour is a part of what I do, but it's not something that's always been able to come through because of editorial decisions and a certain pigeonhole that you get when you're a working class person in these industries. So in a comedy club you have a bit of license but no pressure to be funny. So when you are, it's much more pleasant for the audience, and it's great for me too.
I'd never thought about that, but the space itself makes a difference. If you're in a comedy club, people are expecting certain things. If you're in a theatre, somewhere else in the city, it could be a different thing altogether.
Absolutely. And Ali, one of the things that I realised very, very early on was that I could smuggle Scottish rap into these spaces and it wouldn't be subject to the same prejudices as it is when it's presented in its original aesthetic. Because something about the hip-hop aesthetic, the graffiti, the baggy clothes, the fact that it comes out of black culture, these things can rouse different types of prejudice in different audiences.
Sure.
Then you bring the Scottish accent into it and it's so jarring for everyone. But when you bring Scottish rap into a theatre space, the audience is primed in a different way. They don't come to it with a sense of superiority, looking to be persuaded. They come to it with a sense of, this is a theatre, so if I don't get what's going on, then I lack sophistication. And that's how a context or an environment can prime people in different ways. And so even with this show, the Trauma Industrial Complex live show, I have 3 music tracks throughout that show. And it's not even stripped back. It's the full tracks with the instrumentals, and they work so well to accentuate the themes, and not one complaint or feeling of cringe from the audience. There's moments where the music kicks in and you can feel that it's performing its function, allowing a release for the audience, a catharsis, and it's very satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you feel, as the audience feel, I get this bit, this is music, I know kind of how to respond to that. Whereas sometimes straightforward dialogue, it can be taken in lots of different ways. Definitely.
And rap ultimately is dialogue, but because of the various filters that people have culturally, and I have them too, it's just that sometimes I'll try to work a bit harder to understand why something is regarded as being of high quality, rather than just allow my initial feeling or judgment to rule over that. And so I think when you bring the Scottish hip hop or rap into a different kind of space, which is not something all the artists can do, it does really recontextualise the whole thing, because suddenly you see people's issue is not necessarily the content, it's how the content's being presented to them, and in that there's creativity, and you can manipulate a situation in order to really force feed the crowd what you want to give them, but obviously making a little bit of a compromise.
So tell us about the album, not funded by Creative Scotland. Does it work almost as a soundtrack to the book?
The three, the show, the book and the album are kind of interconnected. I think maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, I sort of came out to my followers and I was saying, here are my plans. I intend to create a multimedia project that analyses the theme of trauma through multiple different platforms and mediums. It will include podcasting, public talks, writing, and it will culminate in a book, a music project and a live show. A lot of them might not even remember me announcing that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that is exactly what I ended up creating. So a massive project spanning a couple of years, and all the different artefacts of it are all available now. But ultimately, I wanted to take the subject of trauma and look at it comprehensively. And depending on what medium you use, then this will dictate largely the tone and the scope that's afforded to you through that. So a book is primarily for something of broader scope. You're laying out an argument, a thesis over a long period of maybe 350, 400 pages. But there are tonal constraints with that, because a lot of people don't know you. They come to the book cold. So opportunities for humour are fewer in that. But then the seriousness of it elevates the topic in that particular medium.
Yeah.
However, when you bring it into a live space and you have an audience that is primed to accept that you have a license as an artist to take some liberties with tone, and once you establish trust and rapport with the audience in the first 10-20 minutes of your show, then you can make tonal deviations. So suddenly things that wouldn't be funny in a book are funny in a live room. And then I thought, with the music, because the music has been almost where I've been most personal for the longest, before I really had an audience, I thought, for the people who follow my music, I want to give them the sort of music from me that they enjoy. And it took me a while to get back into that mode of writing. But ultimately, if anyone out there, and I'm sure there will be a few people who have, if they consume all of the different aspects of it, including the podcasts, where I interview experts, people with lived experience, even did one with Janie Godley not long before she passed, then I think that they will get a real comprehensive, as I say, examination, where they don't just hear what my opinion is, they see my opinion evolving as I go, which then culminates in these final projects where I draw conclusions about all of it.
And you think by having these different formats, I mean, you'll have people that know you as Loki and know you from that first, and maybe haven't read any of your books. Similarly, you'll have folk who know you from Poverty Safari, so I didn't know he did music. So in this time, you might be bringing a lot of these folk together. Yeah,
you do sometimes manage to synthesise the audiences, although what I find is that audiences appreciate not being battered over the head, that you've got this thing that they've read, so maybe you would like this. So I try to set it out in a way where the people who might be more curious to try something that they've not yet tried, they sort of arrive to it from their own inclination, rather than being too strategic about that. I like to just create the stuff, get it out there. Obviously you do your best to promote it and stuff, but likes with it, but not funded by Creative Scotland, I decided not to do your sort of standard PR campaign that would accompany most Scottish records that would be angling for a Say Award or whatever, because I thought, even though part of what's going on in the Scottish music industry is about creating a look, and that a lot of these artists, despite how great their music is, couldn't fill venues the way I do, couldn't get the metrics that I get, but they create a certain look because they do everything in that standardised professional way. So I thought, no, just let the music go out over the course of a year. It's behind a Bandcamp paywall, then it's out on vinyl, then you drop a wee single, and then you put it on streaming a year later, once you've recouped all the costs of actually putting it out. And so for me, putting out 3 different editions of the album was fun too.
Yeah.
Because each of them plays differently. The vinyl's primarily, the concept of it is, imagine this was for a DJ. So the focus is on the up-tempo stuff, aggression, couple of slower numbers in there. Whereas the Bandcamp original release is for Loki fans.
Yeah.
And then the streaming release is a wee bit more accessible because it's maybe a bit less dense on some of the conceptual stuff. It's more emotionally driven, and that was really fun too.
Yeah.
To go, here's a different edit of this, like a director would do with a director's cut, maybe.
Yeah, that's the way I thought about it, a director's cut of it. And the reason I think about it as a soundtrack was, over the last couple of days, I was listening to the streaming version while reading the book, and then so those connections were clear when they came in that way.
Oh mate, it's so satisfying, because obviously you've got to be realistic, right? Most people are going to always know me as a writer of books. That's what I've got my biggest profile for, and that's great. But I'm always satisfied when people delve into other aspects of the work and see the thematic connectivity. Because, see, to be honest, when you're taking on a big project, whether it's an album, whether it's a book or TV work or whatever, I learned really early on, I need to really be dealing with one big idea at a time.
Yeah.
I can't be writing a newspaper column every week about whatever's happening in the news, while I'm doing a TV show about poverty, while I'm writing a book about trauma. There's not enough bandwidth in my mind for all of that. So it tends to be, when things come around again and it's time to get back to work, it's one big idea, and then you might have different projects that spin out, but you've got to keep that focus, because there's only so much information you can retain, and there's only so much butter for the bread, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I work now.
But that's really interesting that it's kind of topic driven, if you like, and then how different ways I can reach people and reach people through that. And the Fringe audience is another audience again, and as you, when you take it on tour, it will be. And it made me think about how you are as a writer. Is writing the album, do you kind of make that different from writing the book or writing the live show, or is it's all one?
Yeah, well, there'll be certain ideas or angles that you can try in different in all of the mediums, but they'll play out differently depending on the demands of that particular art form. With the book, obviously, you can elaborate and enlarge on ideas. You can take a lot of time to kind of set your stall out, to set the table, as it were. With music, you need to grab the listener, obviously, within the first couple of tracks, especially now with the way that we've been conditioned to consume music. I mean, even I'm bad for it now because of streaming. There's maybe a handful of artists that I'm going to sit down and absorb the whole album, even if I don't like it at first, because I just want to know what it is they've got to say. Whereas before, obviously, you got your CD and you stuck it in, and you're sitting away for the CD player, so it's not even as convenient to get up and change the track. Yeah. But I enjoy changing gear, because one of the things that obviously any creative person is going to come up against is sometimes you're going to hit a wall. Your idea needs to cook a bit longer. Life needs to be lived a little more intensely in order to move you forward in a creative process. But if you've got multiple projects that are operating parallel to one another, then when you hit a wall with one, you can get back to work on another one. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's the kind of creative synergy that can happen, where suddenly you have brief periods, maybe 4 or 5 weeks at a time, where you're really firing on all cylinders. It's really exhilarating. Yeah. And obviously that's offset by the creative slumps and life happening and getting in the way. But I mean, I just hope that I can continue to do this professionally in all these different modes, because as tiring as it can be and frightening as it can be, it's so rewarding and such a privilege.
There's a quote in the book from someone else, and it's not referring to doing music and doing books, but I thought it was kind of apt. It was, someone says, you're riding 2 bikes with one arse. Mm-hmm. And I kind of thought with the music and the writing, there's a bit of that going on as well.
Absolutely. That's an old quote my sponsor used to say to me, and I think it's one he heard from somewhere else. In recovery communities, a lot of good information gets passed down through sponsorship. And that was one that really stuck with me, trying to ride, 2 horses with one arse. And that being sometimes a sign that, you know, you've got to be mindful of where you're applying your energy. But I think there are times where you can be kind of on the edge of that, and creativity is really bubbling away. But it's important to recognise when you can be burning out in other areas of your life. And certainly for me, obviously being a recovering alcoholic, then I have to be even more mindful of that. So certainly this has been one of my busiest periods, and this has been a very busy year for me creatively, but I feel nowhere near the level of like emotional and physical depletion that I might have in, say, 2019 or even 2023, when it was TV work, live show, tour, Fringe, and trying to write the 3rd book. You know, a lot of people would look at that and just go, that is insanity. Yeah. But this year it's actually been a bit more balanced.
And is that just learning, experience?
It's experience, and also every time you subject yourself to a certain level of exertion, you adapt so that is less of an effort the next time. I think when you push yourself a bit further than you've gone, your threshold and tolerance of what you can manage expands. And as long as you're pushing those lines in an intelligent way and for the right reasons, because a lot of times previously I would have pushed those lines because of a financial incentive or even an incentive to be more known, thinking, if my profile is higher, then that will result in a greater sense of security and creative freedom. But it doesn't always work out like that, and what you find is sometimes if you push those lines for the wrong reasons, then you're going to experience negative consequences. I think now where I'm at is that I recognise that while obviously in my head I'll be comparing myself to people that I think are in my weight class.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, in the Scottish arts and literary scene, I'm in a very good position. Most people would be grateful to be in the position that I'm in. So I don't need to go at it hammer and tongs, and I don't need to be pursuing public visibility for its own sake, because it does come with its own stress and it does come with its own risks. And so I'm quite happy to do the more public stuff when it's a job requirement, but also to just try and lead a normal civilian life where I'm not walking around thinking that I'm special for too long, which is a form of illness in itself,
And the pressure that comes with success, you do touch upon that in the book and on the album as well, but the one that sticks by me is when you're in, I think, the back of a taxi and suddenly you've been on the radio, start of the week I think it is, and suddenly realise this book is taking off, exploding, Poverty Safari that is, and that brings its own incredible pressure with it.
Yeah, and it was so unusual because, you often hear people in the, people who are maybe like Buddhists or people who are really well read in the mindfulness literature, and they'll describe how that pursuit of that success or that peak experience, it lasts for seconds, the moment that you savour, and then the mind turns to the next problem almost just as a matter of fact. And that was exactly what happened to me, because the whole time you're like, okay, this could go well, this might not go well, you don't have many expectations, but then the minute it does go well, all of that changes, because suddenly it's like you have something to lose.
Yeah.
And that was a pressure that I hadn't anticipated, because I never saw myself as ever having had anything to lose, apart from maybe my name or my reputation in the hip-hop scene.
Yeah.
That was really the only thing I cared about. And so suddenly, you've got a young family, a sense that people at home are looking on, wondering how it's all going to go, how are you going to handle it all? And if you're not in the right frame of mind, then all of these blessings become curses so quickly. And then you're caught in this awful purgatory where you feel quite resentful and fearful, but to complain creates the impression that you're ungrateful, or at least that's how it feels.
Yeah.
So what you don't do is you don't broadcast that you're struggling, you lean into the success, you project that out because you can sense that that's a magnet for opportunity. And ultimately though, you're, as I quote one of a writer in the book, the body presents its bill eventually.
Yeah, which is a great idea. You try and avoid all these things, but it's coming down the line at some point. I'm guessing with Poverty Safari, you weren't known as a writer. You did this book. It was on Luth, I think, small independent publishers. You probably, I don't know if you had any expectations of it, but they wouldn't have been wild to consider what followed.
No, we were at Luth, obviously, they partnered up with me, and I was grateful for that because I was experiencing a lot of pushback in the arts at the time, just as a result of kind of the lines of inquiry that I went down as an artist, which were contrary to a lot at the time. 2016, it was the beginnings of the culture war.
Yeah.
We had a lot of new terminology coming in, new ideas, new frameworks, and while I was largely on board with anything that was inclusive or anything that was about platforming marginalised voices, I was seeing a lot of what I saw as quite privileged middle class artists adopting this language of marginalisation as a way to hold it up as a kind of shield to deflect away from their privilege and how they dominate the arts. And so I was exploring some of these topics in my work, and it created a kind of big boil of resentment in the art scene, which eventually had to be lanced. But one of the ways that I experienced pushback was that I would be close to getting an opportunity, and then it would be withdrawn because someone's had a word in someone's ear. So when Lewis agreed to publish Poverty Safari, then I felt relieved. And what I was trying to do then in terms of just manoeuvring was, I need to not be dependent on this art scene. I need to find my own way and build my own infrastructure. So Lewis was the first part of that, and then the crowdfunder to write the book was the second part of that, and then pivoting from being a very prominent Yes campaigner to writing a column for the Scotsman was the third part of that. Ultimately, I made decisions back then that were designed to create safety for me, to continue to explore the ideas and arguments that I wanted to explore without fear that opportunities were going to be withdrawn. And ultimately, when the book came out, then it was quiet for a few months, lukewarm reviews in Scotland because I had previously a lot of people up here. But when I did start the week, I mean, the whole tune changed. And then it was really kind of building towards the Orwell nomination. And suddenly it was like, my God. And then when we were at the Orwell ceremony, when that was happening, when they're reading the preamble to announce that I've won it, I know it's me. But there's another part of me that's like, this can't be me. And then the next thing, I'm standing up there, I'm shaking Richard Blair, Orwell's son, his hand, and I'm becoming aware of the fact that he's the only person in the world who remembers what George Orwell sounded like. And suddenly I'm just kind of like, I'm thinking, this is a mad moment, and that was the thing, the stamp of approval that changed everything. Because the book had come out a year before, but it was Lewis that took the risk. Macmillan re-signed the book and republished it, and another big campaign behind it. But the Orwell thing just sent everything kind of global.
Going back to the album, I think we should talk about the music on it. Musically, it's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And you've got strings on it, guitars on it. How was it recorded?
Well, actually, what I did with this record was I started out from a point of view of, I'm going to create a record that's easy for me to manage as it's coming together. So what I done was, some of the earlier tracks, I had worked with Jim Sutherland, composer of considerable renown. He was great, and he found a sound for me, and we recorded a couple of things for a movie soundtrack, actually, which we ended up using. And I checked in with producers that I'd worked with in the Scottish scene at different points. But one of the difficulties that I've often had when it comes to collaborating is that people have so many different responsibilities in their life, and it's hard sometimes to sync up when you're collaborating on a kind of more transactional basis of, you're doing this track. And so really what I started to do was exploring a lot of the online market in terms of looking for production that really just sounded like what I was looking for. And then making inquiries through online platforms. So there's hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of producers of all genres who are selling their pretty much fully mastered productions online. And ultimately what you can do is, you can either work with them and collaborate with them, or you can make them an offer and you can purchase the thing. And so for a lot of the tracks, what interested me was, if I'm actually going outside of what my usual wheelhouse is, then I can kind of produce the thing without producing it. Where I'm being very, very selective about what I want and being able to create a coherent sound. And that can be quite addictive, actually, because like, if you've got a bit of money for budget, and you're like a kid in a sweetie shop, you're going through hundreds, thousands of productions, and the way that the search engines work and things like that as well, you can be dead specific about what you're looking for, and then sometimes you just stumble on something that's really beautiful, like the travelling circus music, and then that starts pulling you in other directions. So I really enjoyed that part of the process, because I'm quite a recluse. I like to be in the studio maybe 3-4 hours if I'm working with someone. I always need to get back to my own space. And so that gave me a way of working, which meant I didn't have to physically deal with people and get out and about. And that's really what the process was in terms of just the music of it all.
I think that's interesting about having a budget gives you the options, and sometimes those options, I'm thinking of certain bands, massive bands who get to their third album and the production's huge because they can do it, and maybe, you know, sometimes they shouldn't. So there are kind of artistic questions to be had there.
Oh, definitely. And you know, if I had my perfect scenario where I wasn't required to raise my own children and I wasn't required to take care of the domestic situation and support my wife's career, then yeah, you know, I'd love to be sitting in Riverside Studios, you know what I mean, 6 hours a week, and just all the guys coming in and talking about guitars and just taking our sweet fucking time with it all. But ultimately, like, I think I've not changed much in terms of from my very early iterations as a teenager when I was getting into hip hop, and that is, it often begins with the beat. It begins with the rhythm, it begins with the vibe, and that will dictate the cadence, the content, the subject matter, everything about the song. And I just tend to work better in isolation. I know that I need to grow as an artist, and Becky is always on at me. She's a brilliant collaborator, and she runs the Song Seeds retreats.
Yeah.
And this brings together a really big community of artists who are all connected creatively and emotionally and personally. In my recovery, I've still got growth to happen, and the only real social contact that I get is with other people in the recovery community. You know, that's my social situations, that's my social life. It's took me a while to adjust to the fact that I am known, and so sometimes when I go into social situations, I'm not meeting people who are meeting me for who I am. I'm meeting people who are meeting me because they saw me on a thing. And while that's nice, you can't build a social life around that. Do you know what I mean?
And I guess that's one of the things about being so personal in your art and in your writing, that people think they know you.
Yeah, and in a way they do. And it's not to say that creative projection's falsified in any way, but it's definitely work that I've got to do as an artist. There's a whole universe of material out there for me that will come out of collaborating more frequently, learning from other artists and getting out of my comfort zone. But with this project, particularly because it's not funded by Creative Scotland, and the fact that immediately is a red flag for a lot of artists or collaborators, then it felt like I had to really carry the cross on my own with this one, because anyone who might be attached to it, if I go down, they're going down with me. So it was a great excuse to just work in isolation.
But you have collaborated recently with Bang Bang Bunny, in the track Scottish, which came out fairly recently, yeah.
Yeah, she's mad as a bag of bees, honestly. She is, she's great. She messaged me maybe a year ago or something. So she's a fan of the first book, and just asking if I wanted to collaborate. And it was actually during a time where Becky had been going on at me about, you know, why don't you come to Song Seeds? And I would go to Song Seeds, but it's a childcare thing. It's a 5-day commitment. You can't take the kids, and you can't leave the kids with someone for 5 days. So I was like, yeah, I think probably what I was really trying to do was like show Becky I can do it. Do you know what I mean? To try and appeal to her and show that I'm cool. So I was like, right, cool, I'll collaborate. This Mad London lassie wants to collaborate. I'll do that. So I ended up getting her all the way up here to Glasgow, and she arrives with her 2 kids. And what an artist, and what a commitment and what a drive she has. She came here. We had a session here where we've got 4 kids running about, and then we get her a car over to wherever it was she was staying, an Airbnb, and then she goes out filming a music video for another day, and then I go into Glasgow and film with her in the piss and rain. And I mean, to be honest, I don't like filming music videos. I hate that process. I hate being outside doing it with cameras and stuff like that. Sure. But she made it quite fun. And she does lots of different genres and produces all this stuff. She's a great vocalist. Obviously, she's a great MC. The track's a wee bit different from the one that I delivered in terms of my verse. I prefer a previous version of it, and actually maybe she'll release it as a remix. But she really leaned into the whole Gaelic thing, man, in a way that just manages to walk the fine line between taking the piss out of me and parodying herself.
But it's quite nice in that way, you know, there's a light touch to I think the whole thing that works, and you folk can find the video there. It's really worth checking out. I was thinking about how the Scottish hip hop scene has changed over the years? Because for me, you were there pretty much at the beginning. How do you view it? There's a track on the album, A Freak Manoeuvres, which kind of is a reflection.
Yeah, and that title comes from the Thursday night hip hop club night at the Vic Bar in the art school, where it was Dema and Nice, and their name was, and the name of the night was Freak Manoeuvres. So that title's a reference to the final track on the album and me giving up the persona, so I'm manoeuvring, but it's a callback to those art school days, which is where really I found that community. And those are the early days where you're having your first few drinks, you're experimenting with different things in different ways. There aren't a lot of negative consequences, you don't have a lot of responsibility, you're free. And it was when I had been around that scene that I started to not just enjoy the creative process, but enjoy being part of a music community. And when I got involved in the hip hop scene, I thought I was there at the start, but one of the things I enjoyed most was learning that I was part of a timeline, and that actually I was fortunate enough to kind of have fallen in quite early with the real pioneers of the community. Whether you're talking about Steg G, Damaged Goods, Freestyle Master, the Power Cut Productions movement, Kim Wilson, or whether you're talking about David Burnett, Psycho D. I know all these names are hilarious maybe to people who are used to dealing with folk music genres who might be tuning out the podcast, right? These are all fully three-dimensional people, great artists and great purveyors of music generally. I mean, hip hop DJs, I would argue, sometimes have the most refined musical tastes because they dig so deep into the world of records and vinyl, and their collections are always exquisite and always in great condition, and so the reverence and respect that they hold for just the art form of music generally. But I was lucky to kind of fall in with a lot of them, and Big Sace, Bose, Mr. Defy. These were guys who had released the very first Scottish hip hop vinyls. These were guys who had went and played in Germany. These were guys who had emerged at a time where there was more of a UK scene, and there was a certain kind of sound that was up tempo and aggressive, and it wasn't as difficult for a Scottish artist to get respect as it is now. And so they had this whole vision of hip hop that was different and inspiring, because I had really been a kind of MTV kid. I came to the local community a bit later than a lot of people, but when I found them, I was like, this is my tribe. And I liked the idea very early on of one day I'm going to be a veteran. One day I might one day I might be like these guys that get this respect. That in my mind was my ambition. I didn't want to be known for it. I wanted to be known in the scene. I wanted to get respect in the scene, but I never had designs. I remember doing Vic Galloway way in the early days of BBC Introducing. I got the opportunity to headline the Say Awards. Any other artist who was looking at having a professional career and respectability in the industry would have looked at those moments as key turning points where they had to really deliver something that was commercially acceptable. And I just saw them as opportunities to kind of like take the piss out of industry politics and to take the piss out of networking and a lot of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes that's not part of the front of house. And so I've got a cheek to sit and wonder why sometimes I feel a bit like marginalised, but really I just loved rapping.
But there's a few interesting things there. One, some of the names, a lot of the names you see are still making music now, and also the fact that their names aren't better known. Scottish hip hop almost seemed to exist, maybe it's slightly changing now, but on its own in terms of the Scottish music industry. There wasn't a real breakthrough for whatever reason.
No, there wasn't, and some of us have made inroads in different ways. I mean, I kind of, just as a result of the profile I've gained through other pieces of work that I've done, it's sort of, I'm grudgingly acknowledged. I'm a known entity. The musicians know me, the comedians know me, the actors know me. I'm known in the arts, but I'm a sort of non-entity industry-wise. Whereas obviously you've got bands like Stanley Odd who've come in and created a specific sort of sound. And it's a sound that's totally authentic to them. That's not a sound that they've created because they're trying to curry favour in an industry. You know, you meet these guys and they are that music. Do you know what I mean? Then obviously with Young Fathers and the success that they've enjoyed, then they brought a lot of attention to Scottish hip hop, though they've never formally acknowledged their connection to it. Almost there's a dividend paying to the hip hop scene just as a result of the fact that they have a kind of urban look and sound that people just go, that must be hip hop, even though it's arguable that what they're doing is like interplanetary shit. Do you know what I mean? So there's been a lot of inroads, but I think that real core clutch, that purist clutch, the reason that they're not coming up in industry conversations because they're purists. And they're not interested in industry validation or acknowledgement. They see that as a force that contaminates their process. And so they sometimes I look at that and I go, for fuck's sake, man, come on, man, like your tune is banging, like you should be trying to get this on, you know, Radio 6 or da-da-da. And they're just like, no, that's BBC, we don't fuck with BBC. So they're just hardcore. And every movement needs its purists, just as every political movement needs its ideologues. There has to be a North Pole that when things get confusing, you can orientate yourself and go, what is this again? What is it I'm doing here? And so as much as I get frustrated with them, sometimes because I want everybody to see how amazing they are, the purist performs a really vital function in any sort of movement, and good on them. Yeah,
that refusal to compromise is admirable, I think. We haven't really talked much about the book. I'd like to go into that. I mean, that's another podcast in itself, probably. But just the title, Trauma Industrial Complex, can you kind of break that down for people, what it means?
For me, it just jumped out because people are familiar with the term the military industrial complex, which is a term, I think, that was coined by either Woodrow Wilson or Eisenhower. And it was in a final address to America on the last days of their presidency, well, they're warning the American public that there is a new entity operating within the country, the economy, within politics, that has its own interests that are different from the interests of the American people or the American state, and that Americans have to be vigilant in the face of it. And they were talking about the military industrial complex, and we all know how that transpired. But what trauma industrial complex tries to do is evoke that same sense of ethereal suspicion about something that on the surface seems pretty obvious, but that behind the scenes is really expanding its tentacles into every area of our life. As a result of social media and the mechanics that dictate content that flies and content that dies, coupled with a collapse in traditional health services. People go to social media and the internet to find out what they think is wrong with them. And unfortunately, if they get an idea that they're suffering from some level of trauma, they're going to have to get through about 6 months of cynical, sometimes medically dangerous bullshit before they start getting to the real information. So Trauma Industrial Complex, in the book generally, is an attempt to help them get to that sooner in a way that talks about my own experience, but also offers a cultural critique, not just of the mechanics of social media, the proliferation of the term trauma, but also sometimes a rather self-interested interest in trauma, which is we don't want to understand what people in far-flung parts of the world are going through, whether being bombed morning, noon and night. We don't want to know what people living in the care system are going through. We want to know if we're traumatised because we don't seem to be able to function well in daily life and in relationships. And while obviously that's a laudable and completely natural thing to understand, you can't make decisions about your own health from the confines of your own subjective experience. That's why we have doctors, you know, and really the book advises strongly against that. But the title itself is just supposed to be eye-catching.
And you say at the very start of the book, there's a kind of contradiction at the heart of it. And that is kind of what you've explained there, looking at yourself and your own experiences and then trying to, you know, put that out to further extrapolate on that.
Yeah, exactly. And we were aware early on that could be construed as a contradiction, so decided to acknowledge it up front, but I never viewed it as a contradiction. Really, the book was written, one, because I had a desire to write it, but also the book is me accepting that I have entered into certain terms with my readers and my audience, and I have to kind of embrace them, almost with a sense of resignation. So the book can be read, one, as what it says it is, but then there's another kind of meta quality to the book, which is, here I am doing all these things. Why am I doing them?
Yeah.
What is your relationship as a reader to this text and me performing this role for you? And so if the reader chooses to, they can be engaged on a number of levels in terms of the critical engagement with the text, because I'm not just putting forward an argument. I'm trying to immerse them in stories while at the same time warning them how immersive stories can be. I'm trying to manipulate their thinking while at the same time warning them how manipulative storytellers can be. And if the reader can keep with the material on those two tracks, then they're going to have a great experience, much like the show, where they come out and there's something more than just information that's happened. A person can go through a change in terms of viewing a topic that they had preconceived notions about completely differently. And that happened to me when I was writing the book as well, to be honest.
Stories are at the heart of it, absolutely. And I think we've got this narrative that by telling stories, it's helpful all the time, and you're talking about things, and you know, that's the kind of current thing. But part of the thing in your book is that stories can sometimes fix you, not as in help you, but fix you in a time and place and a kind of self-definition as well.
Absolutely. And it's no surprise that in a period of history where social media platforms are the new oligarchs, are the new oligarchic forces, it's no surprise that the commodity that they require in order to enrich themselves, i.e. our stories, suddenly are this sacrosanct thing that everybody must tell, and that are vitally important for society and health and culture. Suddenly, rather than this kind of, no, what happens behind closed doors might actually have a bit of wisdom to it. A stiff upper lip approach might actually have a bit of wisdom to it. The minute that a story is unleashed into the public square, digital or otherwise, it's been ran through loads of different filters and it's no longer yours. And if you tell your story from a place of woundedness, or you tell your story but may lack necessary insight to truly understand its implications, then you're not going to like the version of your story that comes back at you once it's been spat in your direction by all of the other people that have ingested it because you've put it out there.
Yeah.
And so the book deals with the consequences of me talking publicly about a lot of aspects of my life, and also deals with a lot of the how your interpretations can change based on maturity, based on new information coming to light. And also based on recovering and healing in some sense, where suddenly there's certain things that you don't really need an answer to anymore. Like, I remember used to think, I need to understand the physiological reality of addiction. I need to understand, how does this work? Why can't I metabolize ethanol? Is this a genetic thing? What was addiction like in the Stone Age? You know, and then suddenly I realised this is analysis paralysis. This is me trying to intellectualise something. What do I know? I know every time I put alcohol into my system that I just keep on drinking until I black out and it's blue light time. Maybe that's all I need to know. All I need to know is, don't put the alcohol in.
Yeah.
And how do I get myself to live a life where I don't feel the pressure and strain building up that alcohol starts to seem like a solution? That's all I need to find out. And it can become a bit like that with trauma. A lot of the content, because a lot of content creators, not necessarily because they're cynical or have bad motives, but because the platforms condition us through incentives, then everybody wants to seem like they've got the magic pill. Everybody wants to seem, if you just click on the next video, then I'm going to give you the information that you need. But my book really says, look, you actually have a lot of the answers within you, and if what you don't have, you'll find in a community of like-minded people. And whatever you can't find from all of that, then go to a professional. But I think a lot of us have lost touch with the idea that no matter how beaten down we've become or how traumatised we are, we possess immense capacity for resilience.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it's required to activate a lot of that is not necessarily always being validated in how we feel, but sometimes being gently reminded, you know, You're going to need to walk some of these hard yards on your own, but I'll be here.
Yeah.
But you need to fucking get up now. It's like if you had fallen by the side of the road and you've broke your leg and you can't walk, you phone an ambulance. You know the ambulance is coming, so you don't move. If you had done that and you phone an ambulance and no one answers, you're going to learn how to move. You're going to fucking move. And the book says, look, society's in a bad shape. If you're waiting for the government to provide services for you to get better, then it's got to be a long wait. So you might as well see what you're capable of now. Yeah. So let's get moving.
Thinking about the different aspects of this project, and there must be a difference in the kind of writing of it, in the sense that I was wondering if there was a freedom in rapping that you can't have when you're writing a book such as, you know, there's a kind of bravado in hip-hop in particular.
Yeah, I think hip-hop is unique as an art form, because while obviously a lot of artists and other art forms won't admit it, that they compete with each other and that they reference each other and that they have rivalries and tensions and stuff like that, hip-hop is kind of unique that it sort of blends art with sport. So in hip-hop culture, then you can actually air out conflicts and grievances, and that your personal persona or projection is a big part of the experience for the listener, in a way that maybe you know, a lead singer of a band isn't. You know, it's just the music and the world that's created through it. What I loved about hip-hop in the early days was just the fact that it was a vehicle for me to discharge a lot of pent up and difficult emotions that either it didn't feel safe to discharge earlier in life, or that I hadn't really kind of got any sense of that I was even going to be experiencing. But also with hip hop, where it differs is that it's a forum for conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And that was a real practical function of it. In its earlier days, obviously as it's developing in the boroughs of New York City, where community leaders understand that violence is not an answer in the long run, and that if you've got these rival crews competing with each other, then why not have them battle with vinyl DJing, or why not have them breakdance, get the cardboard down, let's see who's the best, you know? And that's something about hip-hop that's really dynamic and really interesting, that differs from other genres. And you know, Becky's now fully converted to hip-hop.
Yeah.
But I remember in the early days she was the same as most people are, especially people who are musicians in other mediums and genres. She didn't understand certain aspects of it, or she thought, you know, why is this so intense? You know, why do you guys need to always talk about how you're going to like battle this guy and do this guy and da 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 da? And admittedly, it is a bit silly, but it's no sillier than WWE wrestling, which is a global phenomenon and everybody finds it intensely entertaining. But the difference is that it's a bit more authentic than that, in the sense that a lot of the conflict that arises in hip-hop, it is a personality clash. People do have grievances to air, and for some reason, partly maybe because of maybe our baser natures, to be fair, we like that gladiatorial spectacle. It can be quite entertaining just watching people ripping like absolute lumps out of each other and really kind of going in, because they're not just battling personally, there's usually a battle of ideas between them, and they've got different outlooks on life. And I mean, certainly some of the most exciting artistic experiences I've had have been when I've been in those very conflicts, and you've got a very small audience of a community.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going on national television, but it can take over your whole life for a few weeks, you know, as you're thinking, right, how are they going to come at me and how am I going to come at them, and the psychology of it all. You don't really get that in the folk scene, or at least they don't admit to having it in the folk scene.
But there's a persona, and Loki, you know, was your persona, so, and a bit like wrestling, but they've got their stage names, and even you mentioned comedians earlier on, you know, often that's the excuse for telling some pretty outrageous jokes, is, oh, that's my on stage persona, which some people definitely hide behind.
Yeah.
But when you're writing as Darren McGarvey, that's kind of taken away. Mm-hmm. And that persona is kind of, you can't, I'm not saying you hide behind it, but you leave it behind in a sense.
Yeah, and you got to kind of stand behind what you say. The music offers me a way of looking at things multiple different angles, in a way where I don't need to keep explaining to the audience, here's what I'm doing.
Yes, sure.
So with the music, you're sort of, the listener has to do a bit more heavy lifting, and that can lead to confusion maybe. I've written songs in the past where I'm exploring topics like homophobia or gender-based violence, but because it's written from a first-person perspective, the listener might think that this is a confessional rather than me exploring a character and themes.
Yeah.
Whereas in a book, you're setting it up in a way that's more obvious. You're not changing the kind of means of artistic production every 2 minutes. You've got one voice, one perspective, and that's got a continuity to it.
Yeah.
But also with the music, I find that that's been a place, particularly since the first book, where I become more publicly noted. That's a place I reserve to not speak so cautiously.
Yeah.
To allow myself to be human and allow some of my petty irritations and humanity and sometimes even prejudices come through, and I might not realise it in the moment when I've written the thing, but I'll certainly look back and I'll go, I can see what I was processing then, or I can see why someone might have thought that was, an offside flag for that bar or whatever. But while the pressure from social media is intense, I don't live my life according to what people on social media think or say. I've got real relationships and real friendships, and if I was doing anything that was like so off key that it was dangerous to anyone, then I would be getting feedback immediately about that. I don't need someone on Twitter to tell me.
And going back to that idea for community, that community understands what's going on there, which, when you take out of that, some people might not. But I'm also thinking about the difference between writing the book and then doing it to an audience, because, there's a safety in writing you on the page, okay, but then when you're actually, sharing with people live.
Yeah, actually with the book, I blended that process a bit because I didn't feel confident that I could arrive at the right conclusions with a book of this delicate nature without engaging with the public throughout the process.
Right.
So there was a lot of chapters in the book where I would use a draft of it for a keynote at university, or I would do a public speaking event, and I would sort of be spitballing essentially with the audience. And I used this as an experiment, first of all, to see how do some of these claims that I'm making land in the real world, and how do I feel when I'm saying them. Because if I feel uncomfortable or reticent in any way in a live room, why would I write it on the page?
Yep.
Because you've got to handle this with a level of appropriate sensitivity and respect. I have my thoughts on certain things, but I don't know what the reader has been through. And that was one important aspect of this process that differed from previous books, and one that I will repeat from now on, because ultimately then it becomes a kind of collaboration, where obviously you're the captain of the ship, but you're getting feedback in real time. And so, normally you would go and interview people for your book, and I thought, why not make this a public event? So then you're getting that synergy where you're raising awareness of the book, you're getting the audience in, you're seeing how things feel, you're getting your interview, and you're getting a real debate and a real discussion going, and the book benefits from those kind of things happening. But definitely, obviously, in the final furlong, you have to retreat back into isolation and get that book delivered. But I found my process this time around really benefited from blending those different kind of modes, the public address, the isolation, and really opening the process up and recognising and trying to be modest about how much can I really know. I'm not an expert, I'm not a psychologist, I've not experienced every form of trauma. I better be humble in terms of how I put this together, and tonally I think that the book benefits a lot from that.
I think the closest that all three strands come together is in section in the book, and I think it's in the live show as well, but I might be wrong about that. The oversharing section, where the I, and for me that's where everything really connects.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%. And that comes from hip hop.
Yeah, I thought that.
It's like I reference Eminem a lot in the book a couple of times as a real primary influence in terms of the genesis of this Loki persona. And really part of what made him interesting and just media catnip globally. It's hard to think of an artist, even to this day, that really captured media attention so aggressively for 3 or 4 years. and was beaming from every car that drove down the street and every set of headphones. And what made him so interesting was that he was just like living his life publicly. The songs were about his family, the songs were about his mum, the songs were about his marriage, the songs were about his daughter. And while there was a certain artistic license there, he wasn't hiding behind metaphors.
No.
He wasn't creating characters as a sort of composite of him and a few other people. He was literally going, sometimes I want to kill my wife.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And people were just transfixed by this. But what he was part of at that time was a form of media that was becoming confessional. So there was reality TV, there was Jerry Springer.
Very much fitting in that background.
And so people see Eminem in an artistic thing, but if you actually take the temperature of culture then, and then obviously, you know, whatever happens over there is happening here within a few years. And so we had Jeremy Kyle and Trisha. And really, that was culturally the only place working class people could become prominent. Do you know what I mean? I found hip hop, and hip hop also is about getting authenticity through telling your story. You obviously are not expecting to find a big audience, so there's a safety there. Being at a 12-step meeting or something, you say a lot of stuff and then it doesn't get mentioned outside the meeting.
Sure.
I just found myself in this strange position where I got into the habit of talking about my own life, experienced no negative consequences for it, and it just sort of snowballed over the years into suddenly having a book out, and then me going, oh, maybe some of that approach to my music doesn't necessarily translate to the book. It does to sell the book, but I didn't do it for that reason. You realise that after the fact. But you go, how do I put some of this toothpaste back in the tube? You know, because there is an aspect now that's implicit in all of the work that I do, which is it's got to contain an aspect of me.
Yeah.
People are interested in me as well as whatever I'm talking about. That's why they come with me across these different topics, because they don't just want to know about the topic, they want to know what does Darren think about the topic, and I've got to be a bit more comfortable and sometimes a bit more diligent in how I navigate that, you know.
And is there a kind of fear that if you move away from that, you might lose something? Like, say, well, I'm going to write a crime novel or something, you know, it's way, way different. That people might go, well, that's not what we're used to.
Well, I've been of course, yeah, I mean, you do detect a sort of a drop in interest level, or in certain, not interest level, you detect virality. There's a drop in that, like when stuff is not as personal, there's not that initial hook. So people are slower to come to a thing, they're slower to get through a thing. I noticed that between the first book and the second book, where I really pulled back a lot of the personal stuff. But actually, rather than seeing that as a burden, I'm trying to look at it as another form of creativity. How can I use draw and personal experience, like all creatives do, in a way that doesn't necessarily compromise me or leave me anxious after the fact? And certainly one way to do that would be to develop skills in another area. I started tinkering with a story actually a couple of months ago. I've got quite a strong concept for it, and I just started writing it like prose, so like a novel basically. And I knocked out the first and second chapter. I was imagining it like, imagine I was just pitching this to someone and I had 2 chapters that I could give them to show them that I could do it. And the thing about it was that it's still it's a world that people who are familiar with my work will be familiar with, and it's dealing in topics that are familiar, but it's much more fun for me to do because I'm creating a story and I'm creating characters, and obviously I'm drawing very, very, very clearly from influences and things that are close to me, because I think most people who try to do fiction will do that first of all, but also know so many writers who do that sort of stuff and can go to them for advice. So if I do decide to develop it, which I think at some point I will, then that can open up a whole other a whole other chapter for me.
I would love to read that. And the reason I'd love to read it is at the heart of everything you do, to me, is a love of language. You absolutely, relish in it. You can hear it in everything you've done. Where did that come from originally?
Well, it's hard to say, but the environment I grew up in, despite obviously, the deprived label and all of that stuff, and certain aspects of my story that I've maybe dialed up, at different points. There was a lot of art and creativity. My dad's a guitarist and a songwriter. Everybody in my family can do a tune. Do you know what I mean? And anyone who doesn't, it's just because they just didn't stick with it. Everyone can play the guitar, and there's a sort of, before my grandparents passed away, they were the kind of nucleus of everything, so every the family cohered around them. And, when they pass, it's a bit harder to get it together, But we never had that fight in ourselves that a lot of working class kids will have, where when this urge to be creative has to be balanced with being rational or realistic or pragmatic about, well, what are your chances? Why not go and put your time into becoming a tradesman or a secretary or something like that? We didn't have that. It was not unusual to want to pursue it in the real world. And so I think I benefited from that. So the love of language really just came through. I was always interested in ideas. I was always interested in, even when I was writing a school play and all of that, and it was kind of loosely based on the sort of nutty professor dynamic, where you've got a geeky kid who drinks a potion and becomes a cool kid. And, there's all the stuff that's happening on the surface, but even then, back then, I was staying in the drama class on my lunch to write this thing. And what I was interested in was the emotions. What is the emotion of being insecure? And even at a young age, trying to home in on that. In order to deal with those things, you need to develop a level of fluency and communicating them. And I think sometimes in order to simplify the language, to truly simplify it, you have to have a complicated understanding of something to really distill it into simplicity. I always have written the way that I think. The way that I think is a bit flowery, is a bit complicated. Sometimes I notice it when I'm around other dads, and the way that they talk and the way that I talk, and I feel a bit self-conscious. I'm like, well, why am I sound dead weird to them, on a playground or a school fair? But you just got to be who you are. And the way that I speak, funnily enough, while it can be pleasant for people who are listening to hear me talk, and some people say, I could hear you talk all night, and I wish my wife felt that. Actually, it's when you write the way that you think, it's not as concise as it sounds when you're listening to it. And so that is a challenge in my writing process, because I write how I think, and the biggest note that I get is, this is too complicated. Get to the simplicity, get to the thing. So you can have passages where maybe you are kind of, as I say it, you're Hendrix, you're going solo, this is a guitar solo, nobody fucking edit this. But for the most part, what you're trying to find is a way to get an idea across that's a bit easier to digest.
Coming right up to date, this week, as we record this, later this week, it's the Scottish Alternative Music Awards, and as I mentioned, you're up for Best Hip Hop Artist. How does that feel?
Oh, it's a buzz. It was a pure surprise as well. I was up for that maybe 10 years ago, and to be honest, it was nice to be up for it, but I was up against Hector Berserk, and if you're judging the award just on the previous 12 months output, then they definitely deserved to win it, and they did win it. But at that time I was just coming off the bevy. I'd just put out my first album sober, so I was just buzzing to be in a conversation. Sure. But this time around, I wasn't even expecting it, so it was really nice to be acknowledged. And some of the people that are up in that category, I mean, I know them pretty well. It's artists that I've collaborated with or have relationships with, and not in a kind of cliquey network, we're all sort of pally-wally way, everybody involved kind of way, just because our hip-hop scene is a community. And so usually, you have run cross paths with people, particularly Sanjeev and Cryptic, Lloyd his name is. I mean, they're just brilliant artists who work really hard and also take a very professional approach to things. So it's great that they're getting recognised from the industry, because I think one of the reasons people decide to take a professional approach is because they want the industry to acknowledge them. They see that as a pathway to professionalising what they do. So it's great when you see artists who have switched from a purely underground aesthetic into doing things by the book to a certain extent while still retaining integrity. It's great when they get acknowledged. So I just look forward to seeing them all on the evening. It's a nice night out for Becky and I. And I know Lizzie Reid is up for something as well, and she's great. I'll be looking forward to meeting her. And another couple of musicians that are up in other genres that I know as well. So we'll catch up with them.
Well, Darren, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. All the very best with the Samas and with the tour for next year.
No, and thank you for everything you do. I said to you when you come in, I hope you'll keep this in the podcast, despite the fact that you're quite a modest guy. I don't think that you don't have an equal in terms of in the landscape of reviewing culture, consuming culture, and not just to meet a deadline. Like, you really understand the stuff that you pay attention to. And I think that all the artists that appear on your various outputs, they always look forward to seeing what you've got to say, because they know you 100% are engaging with it in a way that every creative really hopes for. So just thank you for all the work that you do.
That's
do you know
very
what I mean?
kind, Darren. I really appreciate that.
Thanks very much.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.